that love or lack of love are the things that drive the universe. And if you're angry and if you're hateful, if you're frustrated, if you're hurt, chances are there'll be reactions. And it's the reactions that cause the behaviors to happen in ways that people get hurt and we have disagreements, and it just seems like it's getting a little bit more and more out of control all the time. And so rather than feeding that beast by giving it attention, we're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can just put the brakes on very, very gently and try and weave, serve, and enjoy more positivity in the world in the form of kindness, in the form of love. We would love for you to join us with 520-790-2040 and tell us the ways that you are getting through this difficult moment in time. You kind of have this sense that everybody's having a difficult time. I've been online and social media is overwhelming. But the thing that was heartening today was to see literally everybody from all walks of life in the same disquieting moment of reaction to the horror of the stories that came from this weekend's events. So join us, 520-790-2040. How are you doing? What do you think about everything that's going on? What can we do to make things better? How can we help? How can you help? Do you have any ideas of where we can go to help? Are there things that you know about that you need help with that we can help you with? How can we be more kind? How can we bring kindness to life? How can we help you find a place to experience the conviviality? I think one of the things that was the most challenging aspect, well, there's lots that's challenging. And I want to say one of the things that's surprising, but it's not even surprising anymore. There's a Facebook friend that I have who was one of the victims in the Las Vegas massacre. That event was so broad and wide and damaging in its scope that it wasn't just the shooting, it was the massacre, and the word massacre can be used to describe what happened in Las Vegas. My friend survived. But I always wonder when news percolates about something like this happening, how difficult it is for her to relive that moment. Well, why is this particular weekend's events more dramatic and more powerful than others? I can't. Maybe we've hit our tipping point. Maybe we've run out of gas. Maybe we've just gotten to the point where we're saying enough is enough. A lot of people are saying enough is enough. Everyone who's saying enough is enough. So why is this moment different? Well, it is. And my friend, who is a survivor, a gunshot survivor of the Las Vegas massacre, spoke really candidly, personally, and publicly on social media about what it means to go through this experience. This moment from this weekend is the one that makes a difference. We're learning about this in different ways. We're thinking about it in different ways, and we're sharing this conversation together. We would love for you to join us. 520-790-2040. Joining us this hour, we're going to talk to our good friend, Astrologer Dawn, later on in the show. She's going to come in and tell us about why this moment in time and the stars are aligned in the ways that they are. Is there an astrological, is there an otherworldly explanation for all of this? Because when no common sense answers seem to be sufficient to explain what's going on, and you have to start going out further and further afield, we have to say, we're going to dig till we get to the answer. And then we're going to talk to Chef Marjorie Drucker, who is a chef in New England, who will be joining us to remind ourselves that sometimes comfort can be found in the bottom of a bowl of soup. This past week, This past weekend, I should say, I was fortunate enough to be a guest of Chef Russell Michelle at the Canyon Ranch Spa in Tucson, Arizona. And at lunchtime, there was a 2-page menu of really thoughtfully and expertly prepared foods that are full of nutrition. These are foods that are designed and prepared to nourish the body, the mind, and the spirit. These are not one-dimensional health foods. These are fully realized, edible constructions of intention and love that when you bite or sip or taste are so profoundly impacted and nourished that the nourishing aspects of these foods to your body, to your mind, and to your spirit are inescapable. On the second page of the menu at Canyon Ranch, after you look past all the sort of healthy moment nutrition buzzwords and food fad words, because there's some things that people are really into right now. And on the second page of the menu, one of the most unassuming little line items was a chicken bone broth. Now, I would normally look at something like that, and most people might look at that and say, oh, bone broth. That's another fad, right? Well, when it's done magnificently well, perfectly well, bone broth is one of the most astonishingly comforting and nourishing foods there is. And to me, if you ever see broth or consommé on a menu, in this day and age, in this time, in this post-fine dining world we live in, if you find consommé or bone broth, best you be ordering it. Take my word for it. And so I did. And when it arrived, the breathtaking simplicity, cleanness, and flavors of that bowl of soup taught me more about myself and about food than I'd learned in a year. It was so heavenly. It was divine. It was perfect. It was rich and it was flavorful and it tasted of all the things that you want a great chicken bone broth to taste like. Now, why do I say bone broth instead of just chicken broth? Well, chicken bone broth has a certain richness to it, a certain deliberate and intentional richness to it, and that was present in this particular bowl. But it was clean and clear and glorious. It was sublimely delicious. And when I had the chance to talk to Chef Russell Michelle about it, I was very, very happy to do so and compliment him on how delicious it was. Listen, we're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back, more of this time together. Lunch at Around the Table, live from the City of Gastronomy. This is AM 1030 The Voice, trusted local news and talk. We'll be back with more right after this. (2:18 p.m.) and welcome back, everybody. This is Around the Table, live from the City of Gastronomy, where we've invited the most interesting and influential tastemakers, newsmakers, style makers, lawmakers, movers and shakers, foodies and friends to join us around the table here. We're going to break bread, that delicious Don Guerra Barrio bread, and we're going to have a conversation about the delicious world of food, culture, and entertainment. And on a day like this, when people aren't quite themselves because the events of the weekend have left everyone shaken. And for those of us who find ourselves wondering which end is up, and we find ourselves grieving, we think about comfort in the form of food. We think of how we can find comfort in conviviality, in hospitality. Okay, so in my native New England, as many of you know, most of you know, I was born and raised in New England, in the Boston area. And there are some things that I was raised on that are deep in me still. We had a great talk radio tradition in New England, and we had a great and have a great culinary tradition in New England still. The food of New England is as much about the people's intentions preparing the food than almost any place else in the country. It's not just about the seafood and the lobster. It's not just about the lobster rolls and the clam rolls. And it's not just about the clam chowder and the other ubiquitous, lovely items that define what it is, that taste of place that means your home. When I was young, I went to a school, and I was fortunate enough to have schoolmates who turned into really great friends over time. And over the years, as social media has allowed us to reconnect with people, it's been really delightful to find that there are people from where I'm from who have woven a story about food in their life in the kinds of enriching, delicious ways that food gives me sustenance, and it nourishes both my spirit and my soul and my body. And so when we talk about food that does that, and we want to talk to people who have that rich life in food, I turn to some of my friends from social media from back in the day, because this past weekend, I lost a member of my family. And I was thinking about the fact that when you're far away in that moment of grief, the powerless feeling you have to do something to comfort. What can one do? And I got to thinking about food, and then I got to thinking about how and why is it that food provides us such comfort, and why in this moment, when this weekend, we saw the most horrific expressions of human behavior harm and hurt our nation, as well as the families and the moms and the kids who lost their lives. How do we take this collective grief and find solace? How is it that somehow, in our most essential way, elements of cuisine can do something that nothing else can do? Not prayer, not conversation, something about the simple act of breaking bread together, sharing a bowl of soup can make all the difference. And so we turn to our friend, Chef Marjorie Drucker from the New England Soup Factory, and somebody from where I'm from, who I believe has a lot of really good answers, because each and every day she and her extraordinary team make soup, and they share soup, something simple and something essential. And somehow in that is all the love and kindness in the world. I'm turning now to my talented, kind friend. Chef, how are you?
I'm great. Wow, what an introduction. And the way you speak, your recipe is really listening to you. You have this perfect recipe, and it's a recipe for life through food, and it's magical. And I could feel it as you spoke. You fed me first.
I fed you first. But I have to turn that back around and say, when I go home to New England and I make a trip to visit your place, I am nourished in very similar ways. You use soup, I use words, but we do the same thing. Talk about the intention you have to make the business you have, to make the soups you have, to make the conviviality and hospitality that you do. Can you drill down for us about what that intention really has to be to start in order to do all the things you do? What's at the core of it that anybody could make or tap into for their own lives?
You have to tap into your soul first. You know, the soul of each one of us is our foundation, and we need to listen to ourselves and not take our voice for granted. So many times we look to others to constantly influence us or give us answers, but sometimes we need to just look within ourselves and figure out how we're going to enrich what we have, what we do, what we taste, what we feel. And for me, I was always a person who had lots of emotion, and I was faulted at many times growing up for feeling too much. And when I cooked, those were my friends, because a lot of kids growing up didn't get me.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent lots of hours by myself in a kitchen because my recipes and my ingredients and my food were always ready and happy to see me.
Mm-hmm.
So I really honed in on my craft. And then I went to college and I became a chef in college. I went to school for culinary arts.
Now, where did you go? Let's tell
And
everybody.
I went to Johnson & Wales in Providence, Rhode Island. And I graduated in 1984. And I got my associate's degree in culinary arts. And I met my husband in culinary school. And he's my business partner in our restaurant. And so when I went to college, it was interesting because it was the first time I got to meet my peers who had the same passion and interest in food that I did. And being a Jewish girl from Newton, there weren't too many of us at the
Johnson
time.
and Wales, I bet.
Yeah, to go to be a female chef in the 80s, early 80s. And so it was unspoken of. You had to, I will say there was a lot of prejudice. There was a lot of discrimination. It was
because you were a woman?
Had to, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, we were treated so much differently than the male students. And most of us were not supposed to make it and didn't. And it's the truth. And they either made you or broke you.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is you almost, to survive in restaurant kitchens, which can be hellish but fabulous, it's like a roller coaster, it's a scary ride. It's exhilarating, but it's frightening at the same time.
But it gets under your skin, and it's impossible to describe to people that once it's in your bloodstream, you cannot ever get away from it completely.
Oh, God, it's like my lust, yes. I mean, I'm always looking for my next great thing I'm going to eat. Whether it's a gorgeous white peach or a piece of watermelon or, picking a fresh cucumber. I love everything great, delicious, perfect.
Chef, you know what's so funny? And I don't think you and I would have ever had this conversation back in the day, but of all the college applications that I sent away for, as a nice girl from Newton, one of them was for the Culinary Institute of America. And back in those days, they sent me a VHS tape of all the programs. And that was expensive and fancy. And the school that I went to would not put my application in with me. I went to a small school and they helped us get all our applications done. And they just were not embracing that particular, because that was like going to trade school. That's not what we're training you for.
Yeah, totally.
That's not why you have this.
Exactly.
You don't need to go. And to this day.
That's why. Okay.
So when you tell me this, I know exactly that moment when you are persevering through to follow your dream.
Right, because you will have, when you work in that kind of an atmosphere, it would be like, okay, if you were on the Patriots, but they only have men that play on the Patriots, right? But what if they let a few in? Let's say maybe 3. And they let 3 women play on the Patriots, and they're going to play in a game together. That's what happens to women in kitchens.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, we get the crap knocked out of us.
Yeah.
And we take a lot, but that's what builds you. That's what makes you stronger. That's what makes you wiser. That's what teaches you. You learn from those bad moments when somebody has treated you with disrespect and unkindness, that that that's something I'll never do, because that's a horrible way to treat someone.
Let me ask you about when you began to recognize that it was your intention that made anything you prepared taste better. Wasn't the source of the ingredients exclusively. It wasn't the stove you cooked it on. It wasn't the recipe you were using. Because we were all in the same time. Julia Child was thriving. The American Institute of Wine and Food events were happening in downtown Boston. Chefs like Lydia Shire. And that era was just...
And all those kinds of chefs, like Ming Tsai eats in my restaurant a lot. And I know a lot of those, big name chefs in Boston, and they've created quite a name for themselves. And yet it's still really, we're older now. And our intentions become more visible to us when we've done it for a long enough time to be able to look back with fondness on the accomplishments of what we were able to do and give to the people who work for us, to our community, to our families. And because purpose and contribution are such an essential ingredient in every recipe in life. So, you start with those ingredients first. And then the way I create food, I have to taste it and love it, and it just has to sweep my heart away before I will sell it.
So your standard is a personal standard of what I like to call irresistible. I think every chef has some version of this, but they have something in their mind and their heart that when they evaluate that taste, they measure it against this standard of what I hope becomes irresistible, and that you can't stop until what you make is identified irresistible. And then the hardest thing in the world is to keep it there. When did you
No, you have to keep it there. You have to keep it there, and you have to get even better.
And so do you know what we say here is that level above irresistible? Addictive.
What is it?
We say Not only does it have to be irresistible, you have to go one layer above that, and then it becomes addictive.
Yes, exactly. And when I was younger and I used to work in restaurant kitchens, I used to love to look out the window, and I would look at the people sitting in the tables and chairs because I wanted to see the expression on their faces when they took their first bite.
Isn't that's the moment, right? Yeah. What is that moment like for you? Describe that, because that's critically important.
That's what we strive for as chefs, is that we strive to give each and every person the perfect bite, a moment in time. Just because I feed a lot of people at lunch doesn't mean I just feed them lunch. I want to feed them an experience every single time they walk into my restaurant. And that experience is with richness and depth and kindness and hospitality and friendship. And there's a real air of that in my store. You watch the show Cheers in Boston. Mm-hmm. Well, that's my restaurant. Mm-hmm. Everybody, the customers all know each other. They became friends. We know our customers. They know us. And it's a community, and we eat together. And as you said, we break bread together.
The restaurant is called the New England Soup Factory. The chef, Yep. The chef Marjorie Drucker is here with us. And I want to ask you, in a time of grief, what is it about soup uniquely that can soothe and comfort us in such a sad moment?
Soup has the essential ingredients that offer comfort and warmth, and soup acts like a blanket that covers you with that little bit of fat and warmth, but has the nourishment of vibrant, fresh vegetables and things like noodles or barley and things that will just kind of like bring your spirit back. And soup, each soup I make tons of soup, and I make all different kinds.
When you say tons, you literally mean tons. You have...
I do.
Can you give us any sense of numbers? Like, do you do 1 million gallons a year or something like that?
I do. I make in high season between 250 and 300 gallons a day of soup. And in
one
the
of your, and we
wintertime,
should say one of your most famous soups is your traditional matzo ball soup.
yes.
You are world
And
famous for that.
we sell a lot of it, especially on the Jewish holidays, which makes me really happy that people have this beautiful soup made by me on their table. I love that.
Talk a little bit about how soup became your thing.
I loved when my mother would make soup, and we'd come home from school, and my mother would have a homemade vegetable soup on the stove, and I just loved it. It was something I could just eat soup every single day of my life, and in retrospect, I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also something I don't know, I was good at making it. It was just, I've been making it my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I've been cooking my whole life. I've been a serious chef my whole life. And it drives me.
Now, I have to ask a question. Did you participate, and this is completely aside, did you or your mom, and I remember your mom, but I don't know that I ever had soup at your house after school, but I could have, and I just don't remember, but I think I would have remembered because it would have been like one of those highlights because I was fluent in food too. We had other connections. But one of the things that I wondered, there was a cookbook that was produced by the Mason Rice School. I don't know if you remember that.
Interesting. I don't.
And that was my first published recipe, and I was in 6th grade. And I've been on the hunt for that particular cookbook for some time. And then there was another cookbook around that same time. Father Drinan was the congressman from our district.
I remember.
And he did
remember.
a cookbook. And I had a recipe in that as well. And I've been on the hunt for those two rare cookbooks. And it made me realize...
What were the recipes for?
It was for... There used to be a bakery in Newton, Mass. that made a kind of cake that they called Yum Yum cake. And it was essentially a shortbread cake. But it wasn't quite as crispy and hard as a shortbread. It's just gently cakier, softer. And then it had raspberry jam, and then it had a topping that was a combination of coconut and egg white and sugar. And it was just completely irresistible, that combination of raspberry and coconut. And it was one of those things that throughout my young life, whenever I was somewhere and someone had a contest, the Tisbury Fair on Martha's Vineyard, a cooking contest at school, I would always make Yum Yum cake, and invariably it wouldn't win, but it would always come in second because it was so good. Something chocolate would always win, and I was okay with that. But Yum Yum cake always snuck in and got a the red ribbon.
This now.
Yeah, it was really good. We're going to take a very quick break. Can you stay with us another few minutes?
Sure.
I'm having an awful lot of fun talking to you, but I want to get down to something that I hope everyone that's listening, that is as troubled as I know you and I are about the events of the last week, that the comfort that can be found in conviviality cannot be overstated. There's a story that's told in my family about the time when JFK was shot, that my great-grandmother and my mother took me in the stroller. They were in Harvard Square at the time. And we went to, there used to be a German restaurant right in the center of town. And it was one of the few places in Harvard Square that had a TV that you could watch something publicly. And everybody went there. There are some moments in time when we are called to experiencing something so profound that to do so alone in isolation is just wrong, whether it's a moment of celebration like an Olympiad or a championship sporting event or something tragic like the Challenger disaster or the assassination of JFK. There are moments in time where the being together, the conviviality of that moment, both in sadness and in happiness, cannot be overstated. One of the things and one of the ways that I believe truly that we are human is in how we share those moments of conviviality. How do you cultivate conviviality in your world, Chef Marjorie Drucker?
For me, I try to make people feel that their experience is in my hands. And I can look out the window and I can see an older couple that are going to need some help. They're parked and handicapped, and it all begins there. And it's how you carry people through and aid them in everyday life, which can be complicated. It can be difficult at times. It can be super joyous at times. I try to be there for all of those times. And when I feed people, I don't just want to feed them. I want to know what's going on in their life and be a part of that. And many of my customers, as you were saying, how you lost a relative, and how do you take care of people during such a traumatic time and such a sad time. And for me, I feel like God gave me the gift to be able to do that for people. And that's kind of, I feel like my responsibility is to cook for people who might be in the worst stage of something difficult in their life. Could be a parent dying of cancer, could be a miscarriage. You never know. You never know what people are walking around with. But I hope to be there for all of those instances so that I can be there to nourish and aid and carry people through really difficult times. And they remember that. They remember that. They remember how well they were fed.
And how you made them feel.
Right.
We're talking with Chef Marjorie. Oh, sorry.
I just had a bus driver, friend of mine who was a customer, and he died of cancer. And he came, and I fed him the whole time that he was sick. And I fed him and sent him and his family with soup. And when I went to his funeral, all the bus drivers showed up at his funeral, and they had a huge bus with his name on it that drove all his coworkers. I mean, if you stop and take a look at the beautiful things in life, there are beautiful instances that take place. And I sat with this bus driver, and it was interesting. He was an Orthodox Jew, and I sat with his boss at the funeral. And she was a woman about my age. I'm 55. And she was this beautiful black woman from Dorchester. And she was his boss. And she loved this guy. And when you are in a room and you see that kind of love and care and community, that's what gives you hope. You go and you go to someone's funeral and you see something like that and you go, there are good people in this world.
There are good people, and my dear friend, you are cooking for them. We're going to take a very quick break, talking with Chef Marjorie Drucker from the New England Soup Factory on how comfort in a bowl can get us through a tough time by helping us cultivate conviviality. This is Around the Table, live from the City of Gastronomy, AM 1030 The Voice, trusted local news and talk. We'll be back with more right after this. 2:47 p.m. and yeah, it's still lunchtime. We're still here at our table, Around the Table, live from the City of Gastronomy. This is AM 1030 The Voice, trusted local news and talk, where the local news is the local talk, and where the local talk is the local news. We are joined by an old friend, Chef Marjorie Drucker from the New England Soup Factory, where the old-fashioned art of hospitality is alive and well, and where they convivialize, they cultivate conviviality, they specialize in comfort foods. And during this really challenging time where we're looking around for meaning and comfort as we grieve as a nation and a people. We wondered, how is it possible to be soothed in such a time, and reaching out to our friends in the business of making people feel welcome and comforted.
Well,
I just have to say what an honor and a pleasure it is to welcome you to our table.
thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
And we should tell people we knew each other 100 years ago. So, and we had very parallel, and I don't know that you and I don't know that I identified myself as a foodie even then. And I don't know that language even existed.
No, it didn't. And that's the thing. It wasn't it wasn't anything about being glamorous.
No.
It was people like Julia Child and Channel 2 and the Galloping Gourmet, and that was all there was. There was no Food Network. You know, there were no Rachel Rays. There were no Giada De Laurentises. You know, it was very different.
No,
times.
and if you lived in Newton, Massachusetts, and you were the weird girl who wanted to go hang out at Bernie and Ruby's Langley Deli and talk to the old guys behind the counter, my first job was working for Bernie and Ruby, and they had me on the floor waitressing, and it took them about 10 minutes to realize I was interested in food, and they threw me behind the counter, and the next thing I knew, I was having conversations with those old guys in the white snap front shirts with the big Morty Seinfeld glasses, learning the difference between rolled beef and corned beef and how to pick out a nice chub whitefish. And that was like going to graduate school when you're 14, 15 years old. Oh, and by the way, the first really pivotal food life lesson I think I can still remember and teach young people is when the guy said to me, and I think his name was Morty at the time, he said, "Hey, kid, do you like chopped liver?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, "Well, have you ever had good chopped liver?" And it was that very question that made my world explode. As much as I had loved food up until that point, that's when I realized I didn't know anything, and there was so much to discover. It was one of those fantastic watershed moments. And of course, I didn't know whether I had ever had good chopped liver, and I made it my point to find out. But I didn't have friends working at the deli with me. The guy might have been 50, 60 years old that was telling me this.
Right.
You know? Do you remember that?
Exactly. I do, because I worked in Newton Center.
Didn't you work at the bakery?
Walk up and no, I didn't work at the bakery.
Where did you work?
I worked at a place called Nibbles. It was right on
yes.
Street in Newton Center. And the interesting thing about that experience is that I had a manager, and he just took an interest in me as friends. And I was in high school, and he was older than me. But he wasn't that much older, maybe like 8 or 10 years older than me. And he was just this really cute, handsome, cool guy. And we stayed friends all these, years after I had left. And he started Boston Market, which it was Boston Chicken.
Right. But wasn't it City Chicken first, and then it was Boston Chicken?
No, it was Boston Chicken first.
Okay.
Boston Chicken, it was in 1985.
Right.
That it opened. And so my best friend, Arthur, who was my manager at Nibbles when I was in high school, he started Boston Market. And
Wow.
I begged him to hire me as his chef. And he said, "I don't really want to hire friends." But he goes, "But I love your food." So he did hire me. And I made $8 an hour. And I started the Boston Chicken food, chain, and I created all the recipes for that national company.
Wow.
And about 6 years ago, I opened up a spin-off of the Boston Chicken, and it's called the Modern Rotisserie. And it's connected to the soup factory. So there's 2 restaurant concepts under one roof.
I love that.
And so I take those recipes that we used to do, and we'd have a lot of fun, old-fashioned great kugel and chopped liver and all those great old Jewish recipes you talk about, we make.
Do you? It's hard to imagine, but going back to that time, and this is true of cities all over, but Boston was a pretty robust and sophisticated food city, even then.
Even more so now.
Right, but back then, a place like Nibbles, you didn't go into every town and there was a place like that. You know,
Right.
Baker's Best was one of those early places. Rick Katz,
But you know,
remember the
well,
Bentonwood Bakery?
yes. And don't you remember Mary Bond from
Mm-hmm.
Bond and Burkhardt? She
Mm-hmm.
was there before Rick Katz.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw everybody. And, you know, I'll tell you a really funny story. I wanted to be one of those people. I dreamed that I would be the lady who owned Bond and Burkhardt. And I dreamed that I would be one of those people that owned a store. So one day I had just had my daughter, and somebody goes, you should look at this concept on Needham Street in Newton. It's kind of cool. I think you'd really like it. So I drove and I went in and I looked at it, and it was an Italian takeout shop, but it was all about pasta. And I was like, oh, this is such a great location. I wish this location was mine. It's such a terrific location. And I walked out, and I was 27, 28 years old. And then when I was 34 years old, on my birthday, I opened up in that location.
Oh, isn't that fantastic?
And I've been there ever since.
Wow.
And I it was in March of 1998 I moved into that location.
Wow. Wow.
So I have been there a long time.
And you know that I was always fascinated by this side of the counter as well. And through my high school years, I used to get teased because I would do impersonations of Star Market's Kay McCarthy in the commercials she did locally and regionally in our talent shows, and everybody would tease me about being Kay McCarthy. And of course, I've kind of turned into the Kay McCarthy in this market. So there you go. How we live up to our dreams.
Right.
Right?
Isn't it? It's called creative visualization. You visualize this, not realizing that you were actually stirring it the whole time.
I have to ask you, as our friend in the business, what makes a great soup a great soup?
It starts great with fresh stock. If you can eat, chicken stock and beef stock and seafood stock, the best soups are made from bones. That's when you get those really rich, gorgeous, stock that has texture and viscosity. And then soups don't take forever to make. People think that you have to cook them all day. You don't. You have to cook your stocks all day. Once you get the stock, which is really the, platform for your soup, then everything else you add in only takes about, 40, 45 minutes to cook together, and poof, you have a soup.
When was the first time you remember eating a food that was prepared with love, that you could identify that there was love in the food, the energy of love, the intention? We started our conversation today talking about intention. When was the first time you can recall tasting the intention in the food you tasted?
It would be, I was very young, and I would go visit my mother's relatives, and they were like these really old Jews from Austria, and they lived a really different kind of a life. They lived in the country in New Hampshire, and they fished for their own fish. They went into the forest to forage mushrooms and eggs, and they knew how to live off the land because growing up that way, that's how they were raised. And I would eat at their house, and you could taste the history in each bite. And these people were not rich people. They weren't fancy people. They were people who had history and a story to tell through their food. And the way they would make their strudel, and it would, they'd roll it to the length of the whole table, because that's how you make Austrian strudel. And so to me, that was about intention. And the way my mother's aunt, her name was Aunt Gussie, and the way that, she would just be packing up food for my mother, and you must have this. And
I love
to
that.
me, that was intention. That's about, you must have this. You have to have this. I want you to have this.
Well, as we prepare to wrap this up, I want to take this last few seconds that we have together to honor the passing of Eddie Polino. He is a dear man and a member of my clan who left us far too soon and unexpectedly. He was a member of the food community. He was in the equipment business. He ran a couple of companies that did a lot of things in food, and he loved your soups too. I want to say thank you, Chef Marjorie Drucker, for joining us today. And when you need to come back and chat some more with somebody with some delicious soup, this is where you can come. When you get home today, do me one favor. Hug your kids, count your blessings, and stay tuned. John C. Scott is up next. See you tomorrow.